The day it all started was just like any other Saturday morning in our neighborhood. I was in the kitchen, sipping on my second cup of coffee, when the faint hum of a vehicle's engine caught my attention. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars pass by our street all the time. But then the sound grew louder, closer, and there was a low grinding noise, like something wasn't right. When I peeked out the window, I saw it. A black SUV crawling down the road, way too slow, like a predator stalking its prey. It had no HOA logo, no official markings, nothing. Just heavily tinted windows that made it impossible to see who was inside. I immediately felt that gut-level unease. Something was wrong. Now, if you've never dealt with a homeowners association before, let me explain. A real HOA will send letters, fines, or the occasional knock on your door. But these people, this fake HOA, that had been terrorizing our neighborhood for weeks, were a different breed entirely. They didn't ask. They didn't warn. They acted like they owned everything, even though they had no legal authority at all. They called themselves an enforcement group. We called them what they really were, bullies with clipboards, threats, and way too much free time. For weeks, they had been showing up at random houses in the subdivision, shouting about violations, demanding fees, and even trying to hand out citations that looked official, but were clearly printed at home. Most people ignored them, but some neighbors, especially the more timid ones, had actually paid up just to make them leave. That only encouraged them further. And now, they had arrived at my house. The SUV stopped directly in front of our driveway. I watched as the driver revved the engine a few times, like he was showing off. My stomach tightened. Then, without warning, the vehicle jerked forward and crash. The front bumper smashed right into our garage door, shaking the entire house. The sound of tearing metal echoed down the street. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. I ran outside, yelling, "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" The SUV backed up slightly, its headlights glaring in my face like two angry eyes. The driver's side door cracked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, bald, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. His polo shirt had 3 blocky letters stitched on the chest, HOA. But even from a distance, I could tell it was fake. Cheap embroidery, uneven stitching, like it came from a discount mall kiosk. "You've been warned," the man said, pointing at me like he was issuing some kind of decree. "Your garage is in violation. This is your final notice." "My garage?" I shouted back. "You just rammed into my house with a car. You can't do this." Before he could respond, I heard the creak of the upstairs window opening. My son, Michael, just 13 years old, had been playing his video games upstairs when the crash jolted him. He leaned out the window, eyes wide, his hands gripping the frame. "Dad, what's happening?" he called down. "Stay inside," I yelled. "It's not safe." But Michael was not the type to sit by when danger came knocking. A few moments later, I heard thudding footsteps on the stairs, then the clatter of the basement door swinging open. My heart sank, because I already knew what he was doing. Ever since I'd started teaching him about gun safety, the kind of knowledge I believed every responsible parent should pass down, he'd been fascinated with history, especially Cold War-era rifles. He had taken a special liking to my old semi-automatic AK-74 that I kept locked away, unloaded, more of a relic than anything else. When the basement door slammed shut again, I knew Michael wasn't going to stay upstairs like I told him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him reappear at the front door. He wasn't in his usual jeans and hoodie anymore. No, he had dragged out his airsoft body armor, the heavy black vest I had bought him for paintball games. And in his hands, gripped tight with more determination than I'd ever seen, was the AK-74. Now, let me be clear, it wasn't loaded. The magazines were locked away separately. Michael knew the rules. He wasn't planning to shoot, but in that moment, with his small frame hidden under tactical gear, he looked like a miniature soldier stepping onto a battlefield. The man in sunglasses froze when he saw him. "What the fake HOA enforcer muttered, taking a step back toward his SUV. Michael didn't raise the rifle, didn't aim it, but he stood tall in our driveway and shouted with all the confidence his 13-year-old lungs could muster. "You need to leave. Now." And for the first time since this fake HOA had appeared in our neighborhood, I saw something I hadn't seen before: fear in their eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. The neighborhood seemed to fall silent, even the birds had gone quiet, as though the entire street was holding its breath. The bald man in sunglasses glanced from me to Michael and then back to his SUV, clearly debating whether to press forward or retreat. His confidence had cracked, and it showed. "Put the gun down, kid," he finally barked, trying to sound tough, but his voice carried an edge of panic. "It's not loaded," Michael shot back. "But you don't know that. And you're not welcome here." I wanted to shout at my son, to tell him again to get back inside, but something in me stopped. Maybe it was the steadiness in his voice, or the way his hands didn't shake even though adrenaline must have been surging through him. For a 13-year-old, he was standing his ground with more bravery than most grown men would in this situation. The SUV's back doors opened and two more men stepped out. One was heavyset, wearing a cap with the same cheap embroidered HOA logo. The other was lanky, with tattoos snaking down both arms. They looked less like community enforcers and more like guys who'd been kicked out of a biker gang. "This is official HOA business," the heavyset one announced loudly, like he was reciting from a script. "You've ignored warnings. We're here to collect." I laughed bitterly, even though my hands were still trembling. "Collect what? Fake fines? Harassment fees? You just rammed into my garage door with a car. That's vandalism, not enforcement." Some of the neighbors had started to gather now. Curtains pulled back, doors cracked open, people stepping onto their porches. Mrs. Patterson from across the street whispered to her husband, pointing nervously at the scene. The Thompsons stood at the corner, phones in their hands, already recording. The fake HOA thugs hadn't expected an audience. That much was clear. Their little intimidation routine only worked when victims were isolated and scared. But now, with Michael in his armor holding the AK-74 like some teen soldier, and half the neighborhood watching, they were losing control of the script. The lanky tattooed man spat on the ground and sneered. "You think we're scared of some kid playing dress up? That vest won't stop us." Michael didn't flinch. "It'll slow you down long enough for the cops to show up," he said, his voice steady. That shut them up for a second. And then the bald man in sunglasses tried to take the offensive again. He raised his voice, puffed his chest, and shouted. "Everybody listen up. This property is in violation of community code. These fines must be paid, or further action will be taken." But the neighbors weren't buying it. Someone yelled back from the sidewalk, "You're not the HOA." Another voice added, "Real HOAs don't ram cars into garages." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The fake enforcers weren't intimidating anymore, they were becoming a spectacle, a joke. And nothing destroys bullies faster than mockery. The heavy-set man's face turned red. He pointed a stubby finger at me. "You're gonna regret this. We'll make sure you and your whole family pay. This isn't over." At that moment, Michael finally lowered the rifle, but only slightly. He wasn't aiming, but he kept it in his hands, a silent reminder that they weren't dealing with pushovers. "You'd better leave," Michael said. Right now. Before things get worse for you. The tattooed guy cursed under his breath and yanked open the SUV's back door. The bald man hesitated one last second, glaring at us like he wanted to make a move. But with cameras recording, neighbors gathering, and a 13-year-old standing unshaken in the driveway with body armor and an AK-74 in hand, he knew the fight was already lost. "Let's go," he muttered. The three of them piled back into the SUV. The engine roared to life, tires squealing as they peeled away from the curb. The damaged garage door rattled in the wind they left behind. For a few seconds, everyone just stood in stunned silence. Then voices rose all around us, neighbors rushing forward, some clapping Michael on the back, others checking if we were okay. Phones were buzzing as people compared videos and talked about sending them to the police. Michael finally handed me the rifle, his arms shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His face was pale, but he gave me a small smile. "Dad," he whispered, "did I do the right thing?" I pulled him into a hug, gripping him tightly. "You did more than right, son. You showed them we don't back down." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Those fake HOA bullies had been humiliated, and men like that don't just crawl away quietly. This was only round one. The following days were strangely quiet. Too quiet. After the incident, the neighborhood had been buzzing. People were calling each other, swapping video clips, and debating whether the police would actually do anything. A few of my braver neighbors even talked about filing a class action complaint against the so-called HOA. But the men in the black SUV didn't return. No late-night threats, no phony notices taped to doors, no pounding on windows. It was as if they had melted into thin air. Michael, however, wasn't convinced it was over. "They're embarrassed," he told me one evening while we were fixing up the garage door. "Bullies always come back when they lose. They'll want payback." I sighed, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "I know. That's what I'm worried about." And sure enough, he was right. It started small. Strange cars parked at the end of the street at odd hours. Not neighbors' cars, these had out-of-state plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicles that made you instinctively double-check your locks. Then, one morning, I found a note shoved into our mailbox. No envelope, no stamp. Just a scrap of paper scrawled with, "Pay what you owe or next time, we won't stop at the garage." I showed it to Michael, and his jaw clenched. "Told you. They are planning something." The neighbors were getting nervous too. Some had already moved their cars into garages, afraid the thugs might start keying them or slashing tires. Others installed security cameras overnight. The air in the subdivision was thick with paranoia. 2 nights later, it all came to a head. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Not just one person, several. Gravel crunching under boots. Low voices muttering. My heart pounded in my chest as I slipped out of bed and peeked through the blinds. The black SUV was back. But this time, it wasn't alone. 2 other vehicles idled nearby, their headlights off. 5 or 6 figures stood in the driveway, shadows moving against the faint glow of the streetlight. One of them raised something, a crowbar, maybe, or a sledgehammer. My blood ran cold. They weren't just here to intimidate us this time. They were here to destroy. I rushed to Michael's room. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, lacing up his boots. His body armor was on, and his airsoft helmet rested beside him. When he looked up at me, his face was calm. "Dad," he said quietly, "I heard them. What's the plan?" For a split second, I was torn between terror and pride. My son wasn't just some scared kid anymore, he was ready to stand his ground. "We call the police first," I said firmly. But we make sure they don't get in. We moved quickly. I grabbed my flashlight and the baseball bat I kept by the back door. Michael took the AK-74 again, cradling it with the same confidence he had shown days earlier. Even unloaded, it looked intimidating enough to give any thug second thoughts. Before we even stepped outside, the neighbors had begun to notice. Lights flicked on in houses up and down the block. Curtains fluttered. A few doors opened. People were ready this time, ready to stand together. When I swung open our front door, the fake HOA thugs froze mid-step. "Back away," I shouted, shining my flashlight straight into the bald man's face. "You're trespassing." He squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "You had your chance," he snarled. "We warned you. Tonight we settle this." Then Michael stepped forward onto the porch, armor glinting faintly under the streetlight, rifle in his hands. His voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. "No. Tonight you leave." Gasps came from the neighbors who had gathered, but no one dared move. It was a standoff, 6 grown men against a teenager and his father, with half the street watching. The heavy-set man lifted the crowbar, growling, "We'll crush that toy gun and drag you both out here." And then a neighbor's voice cut through the night. "Already dialed 911. You're done." The bald man cursed under his breath. The others shifted uneasily, clearly debating whether this was worth it. They wanted revenge, but the crowd was bigger now. The cameras were back. And Michael, standing firm with that rifle, looked like a wall they couldn't climb. Finally, the tattooed man kicked the gravel and spat. "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over." They piled into their vehicles and sped off into the darkness, tires screeching, engines roaring. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the neighborhood erupted in cheers. Neighbors clapped Michael on the shoulder, thanking him, praising his courage. Someone even called him the protector of the block. But as I stood there, heart still racing, I knew the battle wasn't finished. Those thugs weren't giving up, they were regrouping. And next time, they might not just come with crowbars. The neighborhood didn't sleep much after that second standoff. People stayed awake on their porches, talking in low voices, trading theories about who these HOA enforcers really were. Some thought they were ex-cons running a scam, others swore they were just washed-up tough guys with nothing better to do. But one thing was certain, they weren't finished. Michael kept reminding me, "They'll come back, Dad. Bullies always do." And he was right again. 3 nights later, it happened. It was just past midnight, when the sound of engines shattered the stillness. Not one. Not 2. At least 4 vehicles rolled into the neighborhood, headlights blazing this time. They weren't trying to sneak around anymore. They wanted to make a statement. Doors slammed. Men shouted. This time, they weren't just carrying crowbars. I could see flashlights, heavy chains, even what looked like makeshift shields. They marched down the street like they were staging a raid. Michael was already awake, armor strapped tight, helmet buckled, rifle in his hands. His eyes burned with determination. "Dad," he whispered, "it's the final round." I nodded. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, explaining in rapid-fire words that the fake HOA was back, armed, and threatening our entire neighborhood. The operator told me units were on the way. But we both knew it would take time for the police to arrive. And by then, it could be too late. So we did what we had to do. We stepped outside. The SUV screeched to a halt in front of our house again. The bald man emerged, flanked by his crew, his sunglasses gleaming under the streetlights. He raised his arms dramatically and shouted for the whole block to hear. Tonight, we take back this community. This house is ours. Neighbors' doors flew open. People poured out with flashlights, phones, even garden tools. The Thompsons had a baseball bat. The Pattersons clutched their dog leashes, big German shepherds straining at the ends. Everyone had had enough. And then came the moment that flipped the script completely. Michael stepped forward onto the driveway, standing tall, his AK-74 slung across his chest. His voice rang out, louder than I'd ever heard. This is our neighborhood, not yours. Leave now or face all of us. The crowd erupted in cheers. Dozens of voices shouted together. Leave. Get out. You don't belong here. The thugs hadn't expected resistance on this scale. They faltered. The bald man's speech sputtered out, his hand twitching nervously at his side. He tried to roar back. You think we're scared of some kid with a toy? You think we're scared of a bunch of neighbors? But before he could say more, sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights began flashing down the street. The crowd roared even louder. Phones shot up, recording every second. The fake HOA's last card had been played, and it failed. Panic spread through the group of thugs. They scrambled toward their vehicles, but the police cruisers boxed them in. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Hands where we can see them. Drop the chains. On the ground. The thugs had no choice. One by one, they dropped their makeshift weapons and were forced face down onto the pavement, cuffed under the blinding strobe of police flashlights. The bald man struggled the most, thrashing and shouting about community codes and authority, but the officers weren't buying it. One slammed him against the hood of a cruiser and snapped the cuffs tight around his wrists. Within minutes, the entire crew was loaded into the back of squad cars. The engines roared again, this time carrying the fake HOA out of our neighborhood for good. The block was electric with relief. Neighbors hugged, laughed, clapped Michael on the back. Someone shouted, "Our hero," and the rest of the crowd joined in. My son stood there, still clutching the rifle, cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and exhaustion washing over him. When the police finally came over to take our statements, they told us the truth. The so-called HOA was nothing more than a scam ring, a group of conmen with a history of extortion and intimidation. They'd been hitting neighborhoods all across the county, preying on fearful homeowners. But thanks to our neighborhood's resistance and Michael's unforgettable courage, they'd been caught red-handed. By the time the last cruiser pulled away, the sky was already lightening with dawn. The neighborhood was battered but not broken, and in that moment, I knew something important had changed. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a family, united by the night we stood together against the fake HOA. And my son, at only 13 years old, had proven himself to be the bravest among us. When we finally stepped back inside, I hugged him tightly and whispered, "You didn't just protect this house, Michael. You protected all of us." He smiled faintly, eyes heavy with exhaustion, and said, "Guess they'll think twice before messing with our street again." And he was right. They never came back.